What up, Misfits? Welcome to the Misfit Heroes podcast. My name is Chris, and together we are going on a journey. All right, Misfits, it's that time of year again where I divulge to you the happenings of the last year and what's to come for the show in the future. Where I act like the president and I tell all you Misfits about this past year's wins and shortcomings and what I plan on doing about it in the future. Lucky for you, this president can form a coherent sentence and wants no division amongst you whatsoever. It's time for the 2022 State of the Podcast address with me, the president of podcasts.
Playing the Misfit Heroes podcast.
Okay, Misfits, I want to kick this off with a big thank you. In 2021, I asked you to check me out on social media platforms and YouTube, and you all really came through on that. With that being said, here's where you can check the show out online. We're on Facebook at Misfit Heroes Pod, Twitter at Misfit Heroes 1, Instagram at Misfit Heroes, and now on TikTok at Misfit Heroes. This year, we made a change to the format of the podcast and added YouTube videos because apparently you guys like to see this guy's mug on all your screens. I don't get it, but I'm down. That's been a huge change for the show, and I'm currently working out a proper workflow to make content that is interesting and offers value to you all. So what's coming up for the future of the show? Well, in 2021, a lot of you all asked for merch, and I've been in the lab working on some designs for clothing and apparel, as well as stickers, mugs, and some other goodies coming down the pipeline, so you can boast about the show to your friends with some dope Misfit Heroes swag. I've also gotten into 3D printing, and I've been working on some cool 3D printed appreciation gifts to give out to my guests, as well as something I'm keeping on the back burner for gifts to you Misfits in the future. More on that in a future video. Now, that merch will go on sale ASAP. But I've got another plan for a way that you can help support this podcast fiscally while also receiving merch and helping grow the show. I started a Patreon page, and you can be a patron with plans starting at just $1 a month. And unlike a lot of other Patreons I've seen, not only will you get shout-outs on the show for being a patron, but I'm also dishing out cool swag to show my appreciation. Check it out at the link in the show notes down below. We've got everything from stickers and shirts and mugs and stuff like that, all the way to having your name displayed on the wall behind me back here in every episode. You can literally be part of the show. I really like this platform, and I'm looking forward to making deeper connections with you Misfits out there and growing the Misfit Heroes podcast family worldwide. Speaking of worldwide, in last year's address, I mentioned the podcast had been listened to in 12 countries. Well, I wasn't expecting this, but in 2021, the podcast has been seen in 56 countries, and the average listener space is 56% female, thank you ladies, 40% male, sup bros, and 4% non-binary. Welcome. On a side note, isn't it amazing what you can do with data these days? Let's talk about some numbers. In last year's episode, I mentioned that we received about 550 downloads per episode on the audio platforms. That number grew to about 3,800 listeners per episode in 2021, and the show is now on a number of new podcasting platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Tidal, Audible, and Pandora. But the big change, as I said in 2021, was moving this behemoth to a video podcast and broadcasting to YouTube. I'm happy to report that since we started uploading in October 2021, the podcast has brought in 60,973 views on YouTube. I really wasn't expecting the explosion of growth on this platform, and I am truly humbled that you all are paying attention. Misfits, this State of the Podcast address represents episode number 40 since starting in 2020. At the beginning of every episode, I start with saying that together we are going on a journey. And on this journey, I've been aided by some amazingly interesting friends with fascinating ideas and conversations about how they are changing their community for the positive. I've had guests on from so many walks of life, and with every guest, I've noticed the impact that their faith has had on their walk. It seems like every episode I get to see a literal interpretation of Scripture play out right in front of me and the things that my guests are doing in their community. One of the things I wanted to talk about on this episode is my faith and how it interacts with the show. Now, I'm a firm believer in Christ, and the show often talks about biblical principles and sometimes leads to conversations about Jesus. And I've tried to maintain a church but not churchy vibe during the show and provide Christian insight in the least overwhelming way to non-believers or people that may not have a faith or spirituality background or preference. I want to take a minute and address some of the comments and reviews that I've received from the show because I think it may help people to understand why I do what I do. I'm going to read a couple of these from Apple Podcasts. Here's one from Alicia Kenworthy. I'm not especially of faith myself, a born and raised UU who considers herself more spiritual than religious, but I love this podcast. Chris is a great interviewer, and I find his conversations really comforting. Feels nice to remember there are people doing good out in this crazy world. Here's another one from Super Marvel Mommy. Thank you so much for creating this masterpiece. With all the negativity in the world, everyone needs this podcast. I've got another one here from Psycho Bell Boutique. To be honest, when I realized this was a Christian-based podcast, I got a little worried but kept listening anyways. And I'm happy I did. I'm not religious by any means, and I'm not a believer in God, but a lot of what's talked about is very relatable in everyday life. I love the Motherhood Unfiltered episode. Hey, shout out to Ashley Henriott. And there's another one here, J, 1988. I'm not a religious individual. However, I strongly believe that people need to be more uplifting to each other, and this is the perfect podcast. We'll recommend to my Christian friends for sure. Here's one more from Red's Ramblings. While religion is not exactly my thing, I know for some it's a great help in how they navigate life and helps guide them. For Chris to highlight those individuals that are trying to help others is always a good thing and something we need more of. Mad respect for that and for this podcast. Now, Misfits, aside from stroking my ego and flattering the life out of me, I read those for two reasons. One, it seems like many of the reviews I receive are from people saying that they're not interested in faith and spirituality, but they appear to be searching for something to bring light into their day. And that is my intent, to bring the darkness, to brighten it, and maybe throw a little sprinkle of Jesus in there as breadcrumbs to grow the kingdom. But two, I really wanted to read these and show that there is such a need for community nowadays. Since 2020, the world has been in various states of lockdown and division, whether it's economically, politically, spiritually, or otherwise. And I believe it is time to stop and refocus. If you notice the logo for the episodes, it's gone through some revisions, and the wording's changed from church not churchy to change the world. As a believer, I feel the world is going to be changed by inclusivity and comfort rather than judgment and fear. There seems to have been more than just social distancing over the last 2 years of this pandemic, and I am not interested in continuing that trend. So, if you're new here and you're not a Christian, welcome aboard. Each week, I intend to bring you guests that are changing their community for the positive, and that'll never change. Just know, you might get a little Jesus on you. So to those listening that are searching for something, I'll abbreviate Matthew 7:8. The one who seeks, finds. All right, let me switch soapboxes. Let's talk about guests. People have asked me where I find my guests to come on the show, and they've come from social media, news stories, and just stumbling upon people in day-to-day life. With that being said, I've had some people reach out to me to be guests on the podcast, and others ask about people they think would be good fits to come on. Here's how you do that. Check out our website at www.misfit-heroes.com and click the contact form down at the bottom of the page. If you know someone who you think should be recognized for what they do, hit me up. I want to share people's stories, and I want to get eyes on people doing good things. Speaking of doing good things, one of the topics that's come up on the show has been starting a nonprofit. I've had guests discussing everything from how their organization got started to how they can help others get grant money, start their own nonprofit, and serve on committees of nonprofits. And one of the goals of this podcast for 2022 is to start my own nonprofit. I have a plan for starting a temporary housing program for people in disaster and crisis situations, starting right here in my home community of the Outer Banks of North Carolina. There's going to be more info about this later, but you should know that I'm happy to say I've started the process of creating and incorporating this nonprofit, and there will be much more content about it in the future. So, please keep that in your prayers for me. What else? At the end of every episode, I ask all my guests the same question, and today is no different. What was the last goal that you completed, and what's the next goal that you want to set for yourself? Well, for me, aside from what I mentioned earlier about getting the show to a video platform and creating my own nonprofit organization, I've been working on my personal relationships and emotional connections with my family, my wife, Michelle, my son, Monroe, and I put in some work with my communication. If you listen to my last episode with Dr. Glenn and Phyllis Hill, who wrote the book, The Connection Codes, I've been working on my interpersonal skills and relationship building. And as far as my next goals, it's to bring valuable content and engaging conversations with people that are changing the world for the positive and hopefully inspire you to do the same. And that is what I plan on consistently doing for you Misfits every single episode. So with that, here's to a fantastic 22 and beyond. As always, Misfits, thank you so much for listening. I love you. Until next time, be kind, love one another, and be a hero.